Hello everyone, Jester Bell here, once again the female Frodo Baggins. Today, July is upon us, obviously. We already took out Jurassic Park Rebirth, which everyone is going to see despite it being a horrible movie. Such is life. But I want to take the time to talk about the upcoming Fantastic Four movie because right now, this summer is going through the initial predictions that Jurassic World Rebirth is probably going to make a lot of money, even though it's a really terrible movie. But then, of course, the next two movies on the list are Superman and Fantastic Four. I do not have high hopes for Superman because, and as some negative reviews have already leaked, we have to see how this week goes. But I gotta say, of the three movies on this list, the movie that I wanted to really be looking forward to was Fantastic Four. Listen, I could care less about another Jurassic World movie. I wish that this franchise was not being milked to death, but there you are. Superman, I think me and DC are just kind of getting divorced right now. But I love Marvel. I'm such a big fan of Marvel, and I probably always will be. But I'm not excited for this Fantastic Four movie. And even as they did a new trailer last week or so, and I think that they finally started to put focus on the other characters, not just Sue, I still could not get excited for it. And I know that Marvel is desperate to get butts back into seats, but I just don't see how it is going to happen. So on the off chance that there are any Marvel people who are soul-searching as this film comes out, and don't understand why it isn't getting so much hype or why people were turned off. I actually made a list of 5 reasons, condensed into 5 reasons of how I lost my hype for Fantastic Four. And let me tell you, this is a big deal because for years I wanted there to be an MCU Fantastic Four movie. I thought that they would be the ones to do it right. I wanted to see these characters that I believed in from the comics finally done well. But gradually things came out to destroy my hype on this level. Okay, so let's get into it. Once again, this is an open letter to Marvel. If any of you happens to come out here and listens to what the fans have to say about why they're not excited anymore, then here it is. Number 5, the lackluster casting. Now, ever since, the casting is just so much has to do with the casting. Yes, people who you don't think look the part can surprise you in a lot of ways, but with Fantastic Four, there was a particular sense of just being underwhelmed by everyone. Because it's one thing if you cast actors that aren't really known, but it's another thing if you cast people who you just cannot see in this role. Like, if you want to go to the old Fantastic Four 2005 movie, I know that movie has a lot of problems, but I will say that the characters looked exactly like their comic book counterparts. Like, especially the guy who played Ben Grimm, blanking on his name, but they looked exactly who they were supposed to be playing from the comics, forgetting all the other flaws of those movies. None of the people that they have cast for this role, except for perhaps Vanessa Kirby, look right for the character that they are playing. Johnny Storm is supposed to be this super young adult hot guy, and Ben Grimm is supposed to kind of be like this bald boxer type, and Reed Richards is supposed to look like the smartest man in the world. And just none of them look like their characters. And none of them really have been in things that would convince me that they can behave like their characters either. And another problem with this casting, apart from it just being a sauceless casting, like Vanessa Kirby, for example, I hadn't seen her in anything else other than the Mission Impossible movies as a supporting villain. And while she was fine there was nothing about that casting that excited me for her playing the character. And when I saw them in their suits, nothing about the costuming around them made me exciting for them. There's nobody who is visually striking in this group as their characters. And they can be, as seen in Marvel Rivals once again. But also, the cast is all just, each of them, too old for their roles. Once again, Johnny Storm is supposed to start as a teenager and be in his early 20s, and they've only supposed to have been in their roles for a few years, according to this movie. But they cast Joseph Quinn, who was already into his 30s playing the character. And then Vanessa Kirby is already pushing 40, and Pedro Pascal is in his 50s. So it's odd that they went for people who are 10 to 15 years too old for their roles. And it's another reason why the casting is just so poor for this. There was nobody who excited people and no one who even just visually looked exciting and surprised people as these characters. So that was my fifth reason. My fourth reason is the 60s aesthetic for the film. Now, a lot of people out there, this is the part that they will defend because they think that it might look interesting, but I think on a broader scale, for the general audiences and the silent majority, I think that this was a bad choice. I don't want a Fantastic Four movie that is doing this 60s retro cartoon thing. It's not really fitting for them. When it comes to superhero characters, the characters are always in the era that the stories are being written. So all the characters who were invented in the 60s, like Spider-Man and the Avengers, they were in the 60s environment. And when it got into the 70s, they were just in the 70s. So it doesn't really fit for me going back to the 60s aesthetic. I wanted something modern. That might all just be personal taste, but I think it would have worked better. But here's the big problem that I think is a bit more objective with the 60s marketing for this film, is some people have compared it to The Incredibles and how there was a 60s vibe to that movie, which was largely based upon the Fantastic Four itself. But here's the difference. In The Incredibles, the 60s aesthetic that it was basing itself off of was akin to spy thrillers of the 60s, like James Bond and the like. Even the theme of Incredibles is very similar to the James Bond theme. And so that conveyed an action and adventure movie with a lot of thrills to it. But the 60s aesthetic that Fantastic Four First Steps is going with, and you have to understand that the 60s is going to encompass a lot of aesthetics and culture, but the one that Fantastic Four First Steps is going for is akin to what you would see in cartoons and advertisements and sitcoms of the day. It's a very cutesy, petite sort of thing. Once again, it invokes a lot of what we would see in sitcoms, and that's what we see in the advertisement of this show. It's very much akin to WandaVision that was basing itself off of that, and they even hired the same director. However, that is not something that gets me excited for a big action superhero / science fiction movie that's supposed to be about the coming of Galactus and the potential destruction of this world. It's not something that gets me excited for superheroics. Why would you advertise a movie that is supposed to be science fiction and action and put an aesthetic over that's akin to comedies and sitcoms of a bygone era? That makes no sense to me. It's really a mismatch of tones that is not making me excited for this film at all. And since the very first trailer, where we didn't know much about the plot, it is really what has brought down my excitement for the film. I think that it was the wrong choice, and we've already seen it in WandaVision and Loki, so it doesn't even feel like it's a fresh thing from the directors. I think it is definitely what is actually bringing down the hype for this film. But number 3, I want to say is, and once again, this is going on what matters most to me. Like, what is affecting me the most, not in the order of when we found out about it. So we found about this point later, but this is another point that I want to say brings it down for me, is the overemphasis on Sue Storm and the red flags that gives me. Now, I've said this before, and this is why this is lower on the list, that it would be no problem doing a Fantastic Four movie where Sue Storm is more of the central character of the film. We've seen her in all the advertisements, front and center, except for the most recent trailer, which I wondered if it was a response to some criticism. But this has very much been Sue Storm's advertising. They've confirmed she is the leader of the team in the movie, and they've confirmed in behind-the-scenes screenings that she might be the one to save the day at the end unless they change the ending. While the other characters allegedly might get more of the shaft. And Reed Richards especially, I think, is kind of getting the shaft in regards to Sue Storm. Why that is a problem for me is because of the pattern that has happened with Disney and Marvel projects, where they will elevate the female character, but in order to do that will downplay the male character. And that imbalance has caused historically a lot of resentment for the female characters, and it does not create a successful male character either. Because Marvel and Disney has done that pattern so much, and I've seen the discourse that it leads to, and it doesn't really create for compelling characters either way, that makes me very, very concerned about this movie. I want to see Reed Richards as the leader of this team and Sue Storm as the backbone. If Reed Richards was being done really well in these promotionals and he looked great, and then we might be hearing interviews about how it's actually Sue Storm who's more the central character in a story with her giving birth to Franklin, then I would have some red flags for the sole reason of how this kind of plotline has been handled from Disney Marvel before. but I would still be optimistic because of you can, in theory, make a story where Sue Storm is more of the central character and have that work for Fantastic Four. But my problem is I'm already seeing the pattern where other characters need to be put down in order to elevate her, because I'm not seeing great things from Reed Richards. And that also tells me that not a lot is changing behind the scenes in terms of Marvel's policies and how they go about doing these movies. And that brings me to number 2. Now, this really should have been number 3 because in the terms of the timeline of these things happening, this happened first. But the reason why it's number 2 is because this is an even bigger reason for me than Sue Storm. Because Sue Storm could theoretically do a movie where she's more of the central character and have it work. But these next things are major problems for me, which, if you'll recall, this is what really turned me against this film. The unnecessary changes of characters. What really turned me against this film is when we did that interview talking about how they had to make changes to Johnny Storm's character because of the modern day. My problem with that is, I don't agree that there was anything that was wrong with the archetype of Johnny Storm's character being a bit callous towards other people's feelings and being immature and being a ladies' man. And so those are his flaws that are important for him to get over as we see him grow. And it's defining when it comes to his character's attitude. So for them to come forward and saying that we're changing all that for effectively no reason, no one would have a problem with Johnny Storm having those flaws. It really turned me against the film because, once again, it told me these are not the characters that I liked from the comics. They changed them. These characters that I've been waiting to see on the big screen done right for so long are being changed once again, and you're not going to get to see them. But it was for completely unnecessary reasons. Thinking that there was going to be controversy over Johnny Storm and his more negative behaviors, which are portrayed in a negative light, when there wouldn't have been. But also, there's just so many other changes to this movie that I don't understand. Like Silver Surfer, for example. I don't have an emotional attachment to that character. And could a female Silver Surfer theoretically work? Yes. But there really was no reason for it. Why not just have Norrin Radd come in as the Silver Surfer? That way, if you're doing the movie and we see Johnny Storm as Johnny Storm and Silver Surfer as Silver Surfer, it feels like we finally got the gang all together and we're doing them right. It was completely unnecessary to do a different version of Silver Surfer, and they're killing off the Silver Surfer Norrin Radd in the comics just to do this. It's a completely unnecessary change, just like what they were doing with Johnny Storm. But while I understand, at least, even though I vehemently disagree with where the changes to Silver Surfer and Johnny came from, what about the changes to Ben Grimm? I haven't enjoyed anything I've seen from Ben Grimm in this movie. Now, things happen because with Silver Surfer, it seems pretty obvious they wanted there to be more female characters that were prominent in the movie. With Johnny, apparently that they thought that his original personality had problems or something. But with Ben, why change him? Because Benjamin Grimm, the Thing, has a very distinct personality from the comics. You know, he's the tough ex-brawler from Yancey Street. He has a very specific accent and way that he talks. But for everything we've seen of the Thing in this movie, his demeanor and the way that he talks is more soft-spoken, and he's more akin to, say, Professor Hulk. And that is highly disappointing because while I at least know the source of why they made changes in other areas of this, I don't understand why they would change the Thing, one of the biggest personalities from the comics, and you would think the easiest one to adapt. And it brings up questions of why would you go through all the trouble to do the 60s aesthetic for this movie and use that to mask some of the comic bookiness, but then not even do the characters accurately. That is more important than having Easter eggs and aesthetics that are similar to the comics. So it seems that after all these years of waiting to get an MCU Fantastic Four movie to see them done right on the big screen, they still, like the other movies before them, have chosen not to honor them in their comic book roots. The problem with the 2005 Fantastic Four is, well, it was just a bit too edgy. Among other things, they just tried to make them too edgy, and they went even further with that and tried to make this dark science fiction narrative with the Josh Trank movie. This one isn't doing either of those things, but it still seems like they don't want to go to the comic book roots of who these characters and their personalities were. And that's a big shame because each of the Fantastic Four members has a distinct and very colorful personality that works in a dynamic that gives them a lot of chemistry with each other. And that's what I want to see, and that's what's going to get people excited to see your movie. These very distinct, exciting personalities finally done right, but they've made so many unnecessary changes. That being said, now we come to the number one reason that has turned me off to Fantastic Four. Now, let's say that we lived in a world where Johnny Storm and Ben Grimm and Silver Surfer were all comic accurate, and maybe they went for a more modernized aesthetic with this film. And maybe that Sue Storm looked awesome in the promotional, and it did not look like Reed Richards as a character was going to be, in her shadow or anything like that. Let's say that all this looked great, all of it was comic accurate. Well, then if this one thing remained, then it would still ruin it for me. Pedro Pascal. To be honest, this movie was over the second they cast him. Why? First of all, going back to what I said in my number 5 reason, this is the worst casting in the entire film. While the other castings were lackluster, but I was hoping that I could see them in these roles and maybe they would fit in them, I could never see Pedro Pascal as this character. And he didn't even shave his mustache, so he's just Pedro Pascal. It was impossible to see Pedro, either visually or personality-wise, as Reed Richards. I knew that there would be no way for him to fit as the character, and with all that we've seen, he cannot embody the character of Reed Richards. He's just a subdued Pedro Pascal in this film. On that note, when I see him in these promotionals and the reasonings for why he might be casting, that kind of confirms a little bit of the rumors behind the scenes. That at least in the original version of this film that we got leaks for, Pedro Reed Richards is really in the shadow of Vanessa Kirby Sue Storm, and they didn't want somebody to take over her role or anything. He is the submissive one to her being the leader, which is not Reed Richards' personality at all. So that already tells me that decisions they've made with the writing of his character is going to be drastically different. But then all of this weird stuff and promotional of Pedro Pascal as this daddy or zaddy figure came out, which did the exact opposite and has really made some people kind of grossed out by him and made me really creeped out by him. And once again, if nothing else of these points was true in the film, then I would still be like, how can I go to a film with characters that I'm supposed to like and this universe that I'm supposed to like, and the lead of your film is Pedro Pascal, who, if this movie is successful, is going to continue to be the lead of Fantastic Four and potentially the MCU going forward into other films. So it's like, when I watched that trailer recently and it felt like they were trying to focus on other characters, I just thought no matter what you change or how you edit this, there's no editing out Pedro Pascal. And as soon as he was cast as that character, that just killed the film and made it so I cannot be excited for it. So yes, Marvel, if you're listening, those are all the reasons of why I stopped caring about this Fantastic Four movie, or should I say, not stop caring, I'm talking about it a lot, but why I lost my hype for it, when this could have been a great chance. A Marvel movie that is not set in the Marvel universe. Maybe if you did do a modernized take, you could name drop some X-Men characters. And if the movie was successful, then you could have maybe used this to spin off a new universe. This would have been a great idea, but so many decisions going into it just turned me off and convinced me that Marvel hasn't changed and they don't care about the comics and they're not actually listening to what people at large want. And so that's unfortunate, because while I think that Fantastic Four is probably going to do better than Superman just because of how it's looking as of this recording, I just still don't see how this is going to turn out, and it's a shame because it's been such a disappointing year for movies, and I wish that this was the one I could count on. But that's all I got for you guys today. Do you guys agree with my points, or do you have ones that you want to add? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you, patrons and members, as always, for supporting me, and I will see you guys next time.